Two overheard conversations led to both the best and worst times of my life. I know it sounds confusing, but isn't that life? I shouldn't even be there. I flew to Chicago to renegotiate a contract with a supplier who had missed several delivery dates. I contacted the supplier, but was told there would be no negotiations because they had just filed for bankruptcy. I called the airport and found out that if I hurried, I could fly home at 11 in the morning. I left at 7 and returned home at 2. I stopped by the office to tell my boss about the Argus situation. I entered the building and took the elevator to the 3rd floor, but decided to check the restroom before reporting to Mike. I was sitting in the farthest booth when someone else came in and took the booth at the other end. I heard a cell phone ring, and the guy on the other end answered, and I recognized the voice as Dan Winters. "Hello, oh hi, no, I do not think so. Mike sent Henry out of town again, so he'll be with Claudine tonight and tomorrow night. Heck, he might even take the day off and spend it with her. Never, not without Mike. Okay, I'll ask him and see when he's free again, but I know it won't happen until Henry gets back. Fine, I'll contact Mike and call you back." I heard Dan flush the water, go wash his hands, and leave the room. I sat and thought about what I had just heard. My boss Mike had sent me out of town, and my boss Mike was going to spend time with my wife Claudine while I was gone. Judging by the tone of the conversation on Dan's part, it seemed that this was not the first time this had happened. And there was something else to think about. Dan had no way of not noticing that my booth was occupied, but he still maintained a normal conversation in a normal tone of voice, which at least to me meant that it didn't matter whether the person in my booth heard what he was saying. What that meant to me was that it didn't matter to Dan either because it was common knowledge anyway. It could have been said out loud because good old Henry wasn't around to hear it. Henry, poor fellow, was in Chicago. In the end, I decided I wasn't going to get involved with Mike. I left the building and headed towards the house, not bothering to call Claudine. On the way home, I thought about our marriage and our relationship. I met Claudine during my senior year at Eastern Michigan University. It was love at first sight on my part, but not on hers. In fact, it took me at least a dozen attempts before she agreed to go on a date with me. Once we started dating, Claudine continued to date others, and I only managed to see her 2 or 3 times a month. She told me that she wasn't going to be in a relationship with anyone until she was sure she was ready to settle down, and then she would narrow her search down to those who really interested her. I was tired of being one of many, and although I wanted her, I decided to give it up and stopped calling her. It took its place on the long list of things I really wanted but never got. About a month before graduation, I was sitting in one of the off-campus cafes when Claudine came in, saw me, came over, and asked if she could join me. I said yes, and she sat down. She asked how I was doing, and I said I was fine, and then she asked why I stopped calling her. "I'm tired of standing in line, Claudine. You can't win a girl's heart that way, Henry. I don't see it that way, Claudine. For me, it was chasing something that didn't want to be caught. I told you I would eventually narrow down the search, Henry." "Yes, you said that, but you didn't say it would happen anytime soon. And there's a limit to how much time I'm going to spend on what could be a losing proposition. It's not very romantic for a man to feel that way." "I didn't get much help from you, Claudine. I was just one of many, and you treated me the same as others, so why fight it? You were on my short list, Henry, but I'm still on the list, Claudine. I'm at a point in my life where I need something permanent. I'll be leaving here in a little over 3 weeks, and I don't know where I'm going yet. I have offers from both coasts, and I haven't decided where I'll go yet, but I probably won't be here long. Even if I was on your short list when you stopped calling, there wouldn't be enough time left for me to create the relationship I want. Sorry, Henry, this could work," and she got up and left. I also had a short list. These were the job offers I received after submitting my resume and going through interviews. I settled on one in Atlanta and started a new job a week after graduating. I spent the first 2 weeks getting comfortable with work, getting to know colleagues, and settling in his apartment. There were half a dozen single women where I worked, and when they found out I was new to the area, a couple of them offered to show me around. I accepted their offer and met with 3 of them from time to time. There was no spark between any of them and I, and our relationship was more like that of good friends that gradually faded. I did meet one woman who lived in my apartment complex, and while there was no spark between them either, Carrie was open to a friends with benefits relationship, and that's what I settled on and stopped looking for. 8 months passed, and then my company bought out another company. Work was often duplicated, and many of the acquired company's employees were laid off or transferred to other jobs. And then one day I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Hello, stranger." I turned around and saw Claudine smiling at me. Anyway, Claudine and I started dating. And after about 6 months, Claudine told me that she was looking for another job, and when I asked why, she replied, "Read the company policies and procedures manual, Henry. It clearly states that family members cannot work in the same department." This was my first indication that Claudine's short list consisted of just one name. She was able to negotiate a transfer to another department, and 3 months later we got married. The next 5 years were wonderful. We decided not to have children until we had time to go somewhere, do something, and generally enjoy life, which is what we did. When I got home, I parked a block away and walked home. My plan was to break into the house, find a good hiding place, and then catch Mike and Claudine in the act. If I'd kicked Mike's ass, I'd have thrown Claudine out and then gotten myself a damn good lawyer. But it was not possible to catch the traitors, at least not then. Claudine must have left work early because her car was already in the garage. I entered the garage through the back door and quietly opened the door leading from the garage into the house. I was hoping that maybe Claudine would be in the shower, preening and sending herself for her lover, which would give me a chance to sneak into the house and hide. But Claudine was in the kitchen talking on the phone. Through the slightly open door, I overheard my second one-way phone conversation of the day. When will you finally understand that when I say no, I mean no? No, Mike, I don't believe you. You will lie to me, and then you will do the same as the first time. It's bad enough that you make me cheat on Henry, but I won't do it while talking to him on the phone. No, you can come after he calls me in the evening and not a minute earlier. Fine, I'll call you as soon as I hear from him. I quietly closed the door and returned to my car. Even though I heard what Dan said, part of me still said, no, this must be some kind of mistake. She wouldn't do that to me. But after what I just heard from her own lips, there was not a single drop of doubt left in me. One thing I knew for sure was that if Claudine wasn't going to call Mike until she talked to me, she wouldn't call Mike that night. I stopped at a gas station phone booth and looked at the yellow pages. It took me 9 phone calls before I found a detective agency that still employed an employee, and that was willing to meet with me on such short notice. It took me a lot of effort to get them to do what I wanted, but in the morning, 10 minutes after Claudine left for work, the person from the agency was busy connecting audio and video in the house. An hour after he left, I called Mike on his cell phone and told him that I might have to stay in Chicago a day longer than I had planned. I told him that it looked like Argus was closing its doors for good and that I would hear about it in a day or so. I then called Claudine at work and asked who she had talked to last night. I called 4 times and got a busy signal each time. Finally, I gave up and went to bed. I don't know why you couldn't reach me, dear. Last night, I didn't answer the phone at all. I was even waiting for your call. Doesn't matter. I just needed to hear your voice and tell you that I love you. I love you too, baby. Hurry up home, okay? Looks like I'll be here until the day after tomorrow. If you need to call me, do it on my mobile, as I may be staying late in meetings trying to sort out problems with Argus. Since I'm talking to you now, I won't call again tonight. I'll call you tomorrow when I know more about when I can leave. After that, I tried to stay away from prying eyes so that no one could tell Claudine or Mike that I was in the area. I parked the rental car down the street when Claudine arrived home at 5:45 and 20 minutes later, Mike's Escalade pulled into the driveway. He left and entered the house. He didn't knock on the door or ring the bell. He just opened it and went inside. This angered me almost as much as the fact that he slept with my wife. As soon as the door closed behind him, I started the engine and drove away. That evening I went to the cinema, and the next day I lounged around the hotel pool for a bit and then watched TV. At 1 p.m., I called Mike and told him the Argus had taken off, but I wouldn't be able to fly out until the next morning. I then called Claudine and told her the same thing, but it would be a day before I could go back to her house. Then I told her that I would not call her that evening as I needed to go to bed early because I had to be at the airport at 6 in the morning for my flight. I was parked again just down the street when Mike showed up and walked into my house. Mike didn't know it, but he was going to pay dearly for what he did to me. Claudine won't be happy with this deal either. The next morning, Claudine left for work at 7:15, and at 9 Stillwell's investigators cleared all their equipment from the house. I asked him to keep the phone bug, and when I stopped by Stillwell's office that afternoon to pay the balance on my bill, I paid to purchase the phone bug. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I had a DVD in my briefcase and was heading home to watch it while waiting for Claudine to get home from work. It opened my eyes. Mike treated Claudine like crap. This shit went on for hours and I could watch it later. I started skipping the main parts to listen to where they were talking. Have you already told him that you're ready to have a baby? Only last week as you ordered me. What did he say? He said he was glad because he was ready to become a dad. Well, he won't be because it will be my child, right, a baby. All my children will be yours. Did you stop taking the pills like I told you? Have baby. You told him that you stopped taking the pills and that he needed to use protection. Tell him that you want to plan the timing of your pregnancy. When will you be most fertile again? 21st, baby. So I need to send your boring husband out of town, say, from the 19th to the 23rd. It's probably worth planning these days as vacation or sick leave. Sounds good. Your baby? I'm already looking forward to it. It was news to me that Claudine was ready to have a baby. She didn't tell me about this. Mike spent the night with her and then told Claudine to plan to have motel dinner with him that afternoon. When Claudine got home, I hid the DVD and cooked dinner on the stove. I wasn't ready to face her yet, so when she ran up to me, hugged me, and leaned in to kiss me, I steeled myself and hoped I wouldn't throw up. Can dinner wait? I'm so damn bored, I think it can wait. Fine, turn it down or turn off so it doesn't burn while I run upstairs and take a quick shower. Meet me in bed in 5 minutes. Fine, agreed. I wondered what was going on. She didn't do anything that Mike told her to do or that she promised him she would do. Then we went down for dinner. She told me all the latest gossip that I had missed because I was away, and then we washed the dishes, watched TV, and went to bed. I was fast asleep and didn't know if she called Mike or not. Listening to the telephone conversation would give me the answer to this question. The next day was Saturday, and it was the only time a month that Claudine got her hair done. As soon as she left, I looked in the medicine cabinet in the bathroom. After watching the DVD, I went to the bathroom and checked to see if Claudine had a packet of pills. I counted them, and they were one less than the day before, so she lied to Mike about stopping the pills. Then I pulled the tape out of the tape recorder on the telephone line and listened to it. He's fast asleep. Did you do what I told you? Of course I did. How did you end up with such an ignorant clown like him? He's not that bad, of course not. He is ignorant. It's good for us, baby. If he hadn't been so ignorant, we might have been caught. Have you already figured out how to persuade him to name the child Michael if a boy is born and Michelle if a girl is born? No, but we still have a lot of time before we get to that. I want you to find a way to spend an hour or so with me on Tuesday. I will try. There was more to it than that, but that was the point. I was wondering how it started and how long it lasted. Not that it matters. It started and continued, and as a result, it will hurt a lot. I made an appointment with a lawyer on Monday and was in his office on Tuesday afternoon when Claudine called me and said she would be working late. I had already played the tape for the lawyer, so we both knew what late meant. Everything was thought out to the smallest detail. There were no violations in that state, so the assets were to be divided equally, and we were both making comparable salaries, so there was no alimony. What I learned from this deal was that our state allowed foreclosure of attachment claims, and that was a big deal. Mike managed my department and Claudine's department, and our company's policy and procedure manual was quite specific when it came to relationships between managers and subordinates. Mike having anything to do with Claudine at all was strictly forbidden, and him sending me out of town so they could be together was tantamount to a death sentence. So in addition to suing Mike for alienation of feelings, I would sue the company for failure to comply with the requirements of charter. At the very least, Mike and Claudine would join the ranks of the unemployed, and the chances were good that the company would settle the lawsuit without publicity. I wouldn't be able to work there again after I sued, but given that I realized that everyone I worked with, as evidenced by Dan's phone call, knew that I was being bullied and kept quiet about that, I didn't want to stay there and work with those assholes anyway. Everything was decided before I left the lawyer's office. Mike, Claudine, and company were scheduled to be served on Friday morning. The company had to be served first, represented by Marge Bishop, the HR manager, then Mike and Claudine. This was done with the expectation that Marge would immediately call Mike and talk to him when the bailiff arrived at his desk. Mike will know who this guy is and what will happen to him as soon as he hangs up. The time was set for 11 o'clock in the morning, since every Friday at noon I met Claudine for lunch. This way I could save a few dollars by not buying food from this cheater. When I left the office, I saw a woman sitting in the reception area. Our eyes met and she smiled at me nervously and looked away. She seemed familiar to me. I had already seen it somewhere, but I couldn't remember. Well, these things happened and I knew it would linger in the back of my mind and bother me until I could remember her. That evening, my kiss with Claudine again tasted like toothpaste. She actually got up and called Mike after I fell asleep. The next day, I checked the recording on the voice recorder, and it was almost a repeat of the last call I listened to. She told him that she did all the things that he told her to do, but that she did not actually do. They discussed what they would do on my next trip, and talked about Claudine sneaking out to meet on Saturday or Sunday. They didn't know it, but they had no reason to hide after Friday. I had no idea what was going on with Claudine. Our lovemaking had not changed, and there were no signs that she was unhappy with me. The love and affection seemed to be there, so what was she doing with Mike, and why did she lie to him so much about what she did to me on his instructions? Well, he wasn't married, so she could have moved in with him after her rude awakening on Friday. On Friday at 9 o'clock in the morning, I told Mike that I had an appointment with the doctor at 10 and, depending on the outcome, I might not be back. It's a pity that I wasn't there where I could have seen him when the documents were submitted to him. The guy delivering the papers worked for a lawyer and was tasked with handing the papers to Mike and saying, "The ignoramus asked me to tell you that he wishes you a good day." But I needed to stop by the house and pack all of Claudine's things when she rushed home after being served. I left at 10, came home and started packing Claudine's things and moving them into the garage. I was about a third of the way through when my cell phone rang. I looked at my watch and saw that it was 10 minutes past 12 and it was Claudine who called. I smiled and sent that call and a dozen others to voicemail. Then my home phone rang and I picked up the receiver. Hello, Henry, what are you doing at home and what do these divorce papers mean? And what the hell is all this nonsense about adultery? Well, first of all, what you did to Mike was adultery, and because of what you did to Mike, I am divorcing you. As for what I do here at home, I collect your things and move them to the garage where they will be when you come to get them. Just wait, Henry. Don't do anything until I arrive. We need to talk, honey. It's not what you think. I'm leaving right now and heading straight home. I love you, Henry. Do not doubt it. Don't even doubt it. She hung up before I could tell her not to worry because it would be a waste of time. I went into the office and grabbed a copy of the DVD, put it in the player, turned on the TV, and then went back to work packing Claudine's things. I heard her enter the house and run up the stairs. She rushed towards me and tried to hug me, but I pushed her away. I took her hand and led her to the sofa, sat her down on it, and then went to the player and pressed the play button. Sit here and watch until it's all over, and then I'll listen to what you have to say, but I warn you in advance that you'll only be wasting your time. 5 minutes later, she came into the bedroom, but before she could say a word, I said, I told you to watch it until it ends and then I'll listen. You still have 40 minutes left. Be grateful that I only make you watch the highlights and not the long hours I had to watch. I don't need to watch this. I was there. I know what happened. Then why are you here wasting my time? Because it's not what you think, and I have to let you know that. Am I a fool? Was all this done with special effects? No need for sarcasm, Henry. I mean, it has nothing to do with you or us. I love you, Henry, and always have. Mike wasn't supposed to be born, but he was, and I ended up liking what I got from him, so I kept seeing him. I don't like him, Henry, and to tell you the truth, most of the time I don't even really like him. He was never a threat to you, Henry. I am yours and will always be yours. I laughed at this and then said, how can something happen that shouldn't happen and then continue to happen? I met Mike probably half a dozen times after I first got here and before you and I started dating. I drank a lot at the company's last Christmas party, remember? You laughed at the way I was acting, and I felt good and had a great time. I danced with everyone in the department, and when Mike's turn came, he kissed me. There was nothing special about it. Almost all the guys there did the same thing. I was in a great mood, so I moved away from him a little, and then he walked me back to our table. About half an hour later, I got up to go to the toilet, and when I came out and was heading back to our table, the door opened, a hand grabbed me by the elbow and pulled me into the dark room. I thought it was you. He recorded what happened between us on his mobile phone. I realized that you might hear them and not believe them. After that evening, I tried to stay away from him, but 5 weeks later, when you were out of town, a group of me and I went to C2B drink after work. Mike came, and about an hour later, he came up to me, leaned over and whispered, "Come on." I told him that I would not go anywhere with him, and he smiled and said, "Okay, let's see what your colleagues say when they hear this." He pulled out his cell phone, but before he could press the button to play, I said, "Don't," grabbed my purse and followed him into the parking lot. After that, whenever he ordered, I obeyed. There was something in me that I didn't even know I had, and he found it. I was with him because I was always afraid of what he would do if I said no. Yes, I loved it, but I would have stopped in a heartbeat if I could have gotten that damn cell phone and destroyed it. I love you, Henry, honestly, I love it, but not enough to trust me. You should have come to my place at that Christmas party. You should have believed me and my love for you, but you didn't. Because you didn't do this, all the people I work with laugh at the ignorant cuckold behind his back. Everyone at work knows, but I was out of town on Tuesday, wasn't I? You humiliated me in front of everyone, Claudine, and it doesn't matter why you did it. The only thing that matters is that you did it and would continue to do it. You would have continued doing this if I hadn't found out. There is no room in my life for an unfaithful wife. So if you're done with what you came here to do, you can start moving some of your things into the car. Why should I leave? This house is as much mine as it is yours, because I have nowhere to go, but you have. You can live with your lover, of course. The real reason is that, given how I feel about things now, there's a good chance I'll hurt you if you try to stay here. Who do you think you're kidding, Henry? You are not the type to hurt me or any other woman. The old Henry would never have done this, but you and Mike created a new Henry, and I don't even know how the new Henry will behave. He has a lot of anger built up and needs to be released. Being around when that happens probably wouldn't be a good thing. Just go away, Claudine. I don't want to look at you. I don't want to hear your voice. I don't want to smell you. Just fucking leave. She looked at me. Tears flowed down her cheeks and she started to say something, but I yelled at her, "Get out of here." She ran out of the room and I went back to stuffing her shit into plastic bags. I spent the weekend doing odd jobs around the house, cleaning it up so it looks better when I put it up for sale. Claudine might have wanted to buy me out and keep the place, but I certainly didn't want that after seeing Mike in my bedroom. But even if Claudine wanted it, I would still need to get a market appraisal, so I was left cleaning and getting the house in order so it would look attractive to the realtor. I had no idea what I would be faced with when I went to work on Monday. What I received was nothing like what I expected. As I exited the elevator and headed to my desk, Dan Winters stood up and started clapping, and then everyone in the room stood up and cheered. Dan came up to me and said, "Let me buy you a cup of coffee." He led me into the break room, and we got coffee and sat at a table, and Sherry Gossett came over and joined us. Sherry looked at Dan, he nodded, and Sherry said, "We were chosen to apologize for the team." Apologize? For what? For keeping silent about what happened between Mike and Claudine. We didn't know what the situation was, so we were silent. What is the situation? I don't understand. We didn't know whether you knew or not, and we didn't want to interfere. I think they saw the confusion on my face, because Dan said, "We didn't think you were really that kind of guy. But there are guys who like their women sleeping with other men, and guys who like watching theirs. Wives with other men, there are so-called open marriages. We didn't know if this was really the case, so we just kept quiet. It was only when we noticed that this only happened when you were out of town that we began to suspect that you had no idea what was going on." I looked from Dan to Sherry, and I think they could still see that I was still trying to figure out what they were trying to say, so Sherry said, "We decided that we should tell you about it, but in a way that if you didn't know, we could tell you, and if you knew, we wouldn't embarrass you by asking about it face to face." Dan took the lead and said, "I knew you had to be in Chicago when I saw you going to the bathroom, so I followed you and faked the phone conversation you overheard. If you knew there wouldn't be a face-to-face meeting, it might cause awkwardness, and if you didn't, it would give you a warning." We received our answer on Friday while serving Mike and Claudine. The icing on the cake was that they catered for company too. Mike was called into the office and suspended without pay while the allegations against you were investigated. This is exactly what was said in the congratulations you received this morning. Got rid of this asshole and also sued him. Sherry said they sent him home at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and at 3 o'clock they called everyone in the office and asked if we knew what was going on. Management treats most of us differently now. They say that by not informing them, we gave you the opportunity to sue them. I expect that when the big shots get here this morning, they will call you. The first thing I planned was to meet with Markman and give him my resignation letter. As for talking to him, my lawyer has already told me that they should direct any questions to him. Why are you resigning? After I heard that phone conversation, I thought that everyone here knew what was going on and was laughing at me behind my back. There is no way I can continue working with such a bunch of assholes. We don't want you to resign. I may not have a choice in the matter. It's unlikely they'll leave me here since I'm suing them. Another reason for resigning is so that I can leave on my own terms and not be fired because of some fabricated bullshit that would be used to hide the real reason for my dismissal. I looked at my watch and said that I had better get back to my desk. I stood up and extended my hand to Dan. "Thank you for the warning." We shook hands, I hugged Sherry and headed to my desk. At 9:15, I was called into Markman's office and handed him my resignation letter. He asked me what it was and why, and I told him. He returned the statement to me and said they would never do anything like that. "Besides, we have plans for you. We want you to take Mike's place. You know he's fired. We want to discuss your claim, but I understand that we will need to make arrangements with your lawyer before we can do this." The rest was as expected. Mike and Claudine were fired. The lawyer and the company agreed that the company would pay my attorney's fees and I would drop the lawsuit. I got Mike's job, which gave me a raise of $18,000 a year. Claudine didn't contest the divorce and didn't need the house, so it was sold. I haven't seen or heard from her since the day I gave her the check for her share of the house sale. Mike settled a foreclosure lawsuit. He had to sell his house to raise money, and with that money and my share of the sale of the house, I bought a high-end apartment. One day, Mike answered a knock at his apartment door and was punched in the face by a man in a ski mask. A neighbor returning home from an evening out on the town found him curled up in a ball and called 911. For some strange reason, 2 detectives came to me and asked if I could shed some light on the case, but that was all I could do was to repeat the words of SGD. Immortal words of Schultz, I do not know anything. When they asked me if I could account for the time I spent the night it happened to poor Mike, I told them I was just spending time with my TV. So you don't have an alibi for this time. Alibi? Why the hell do I need an alibi? I understand the case is still open. Either way, that was the worst part of the story. The best part started around the time the divorce started. It had been about 3 months since my divorce was final, and although I had sold the house, I was still living in it while waiting for the closing date. I was driving to work and saw a woman trying to change a flat tire, and I stopped to see if I could help. She seemed familiar to me, and only when I was lifting the car off the jack did I remember who she was. This was the same woman who smiled nervously at me the last time I was in my lawyer's office. As I put the jack and flat tire in the trunk, she thanked me for my help and offered to pay me for it. I told her she could buy me a cup of coffee and a sweet roll at the Denny's across the street, and she smiled and said she would. We introduced ourselves as we walked across the street to the restaurant. Her name was Tammy. When we sat down, she said, "I have a feeling that I know you from somewhere." I chuckled and said, "That's the feeling I got when I saw you in my lawyer's office." "Exactly, that's where I saw you, but when I saw you there, I had the feeling that I had seen you somewhere before. Do you live in this area? Block 1-2, 100 in Wilcox, it's only 6 blocks from me. I've probably seen you on a walk or in one of the local shops. If I'm not touching on a sore subject, what did you need legal help with? How to get rid of an abusive husband and you how to get rid of a cheating wife. Is there any progress? The final decision must be made in 60 days, so fast she doesn't resist. I wish I could say the same. Not everything is smooth as I understand it." Jules isn't fighting the divorce itself, but he spent months fighting over every piece of furniture, every little detail, and who gets to keep the photos in the photo albums. He even fights over who to give the fish in the aquarium to. I don't want to get too personal, but why don't you just let it all go to hell and let him get what he wants? First of all, if you keep it to yourself after he makes such a fuss about it, it will only remind you of him. The other thing is that he's probably just fighting about it to annoy you. Take it from him, or you could give him some of what he wants. What do you have in mind? Are you quarreling over the coffee table? Cut it in half with a chainsaw and give him half of it. Photos in an album. Cut out anything you don't want him to have from the photos and then give him the albums. I don't know much about aquariums, but I don't see where one could show more affection for the fish that live in them. Unplug it and leave it for a couple of days, then tell him to come and get it, or better yet, have it delivered to him. I didn't think I could be so angry and nasty. It's not mean or disgusting. All you are doing is giving back to him what he gives to you. All he does is deliberately try to piss you off. He takes pleasure in making you suffer. Do you really think he cares about a soft chair or fish? Why waste energy playing his games? You can buy a new coffee table and one that will not be imprinted with the memory of it. You can copy the photo albums before you give them to him and replace the goldfish for $1 each. The purpose of divorce is to get rid of him. Letting him stick around and constantly fight over things that won't lead to success in the long run is simply pointless. You'd think my lawyer should have told me that. Why does he need this? He became a lawyer because as a lawyer he could make good money. He may be working for you to get you a divorce, but the longer it takes, the higher his score. Why should he care that you and your hubby want to quarrel over furniture and delay the process? I probably should have had a flat tire earlier. I have many more good ideas if you would like to discuss them over dinner tonight. It was a hit and miss attempt, and I didn't expect it to be successful, but she surprised me and said she would really like it. When I picked her up at 7, I was surprised again. When she said wanting 200 block in Wilcox, I didn't pay much attention to it, but it was a pretty upscale area. The house I approached was supposed to be in the area of 1.5 million, and I wondered why she did not mention this house in her quarrels with her ex-husband. We had dinner at Alfredo's and Ville Scalapini in Chianti. I told her my story and received her in response. Her story was simple. Her husband became violent when he drank. He always felt guilty the next day. He apologized and swore that it would never happen again if she forgave him, but of course it did until she finally had enough. She called the police on him several times so that when the deadline came, his abuse was recorded. She called the police and he ended up in jail. She refused to post bail for him, and when he was released, he was served with divorce papers and a restraining order, which he promptly violated. He came home drunk, hit her again, and then went back to sleep. When he was released, he was given 90 days for contempt of court and violating a restraining order. When he was released, he was warned that the next time he would spend 6 months in prison and the third time he would get a year. He decided that he didn't like prison and started pestering her about the furniture. After dinner, I suggested we go to the Black Mushroom next door for a drink and a dance, and she agreed. I took her home around 1 a.m. and walked her to the door. I told her that I liked it and that I would like to do it again, and then she asked, "Can you do me a favor and kiss me?" I'd love to, but why is it doing you a favor? Don't look back, but there's a red and white Ford F-150 right down the street. I want this idiot to see this. Shouldn't you be inside and call the police? I can't. The injunction says 150 meters, but where he sits it's 160 meters. I know because I measured it myself. What if he gets angry and says to hell with the restraining order? She opened her purse and showed me the gun she had and said, I would almost be glad if he did. I hugged her and kissed her. Then she said, call me, and went into the house. I made it a rule not to look at the pickup when I drove out. I was not at all surprised when the truck pulled away from the curb and followed me towards my house. He didn't slow down as he drove by, but I'm willing to bet he remembered my address. It would be interesting to see what he would do with it. Over the next 2 weeks, I met with Tammy 3 times and learned a little more about her. She owned her house outright and it belonged to her before she married Jules, so he had no rights to it. She was what she called a trust fund kid, as her parents and grandparents were very wealthy and set up several trust funds for her, which she joined when she turned 21. I also found out that she was working unpaid volunteering for several charities in the city. Every date ended with one of her kisses, and on 2 out of 3 dates, the F-150 walked me home. I was on the verge of prying into Tammy's business and reporting her ex's stalking behavior to the police and warning them that if they didn't do something, I would, when suddenly it didn't matter anymore. I had a date with Tammy on Wednesday, and then I left, but this time he didn't follow me. I didn't attach much importance to this, believing that by that time he already knew who I was and where I lived. Tammy called me at 9:30. She asked if I could stop by the police station to pick her up and take her home. I asked what was wrong, and she said she would tell me when I got there. It turned out that there would be no more arguments over furniture or fish. 10 minutes after I left her ex-husband tried to enter the house despite a restraining order, and 3 steps from the house, Tammy used a gun in self-defense. She called her lawyer while waiting for police to respond and spent much of the evening at the station discussing her story with detectives. When it was over, she was asked not to leave the city and was told that she might still need to talk to someone from the district attorney's office. Her lawyer told her she had nothing to worry about and offered her a ride home, but she decided she'd rather call me. As we pulled away from the police station, she asked me to take her to the motel. "I can't be at home now. There won't be a motel. I'll take you to my place. I don't think you need to be alone for a while." She didn't mind, so I took her to my place, fed her, and showed her to the master bedroom. I gave her a nightgown that I had forgotten to throw away when I was packing Claudine's things, showed her where everything was, and then said, "Rest for a while, and if you need anything, just call." She turned to me and said, "I really need something. I need to be hugged." In the morning, she said, "Sorry, you probably think badly of me now." I kissed her forehead and said, "I don't think so. I needed it as much as you did, but I intended to wait until the divorce was final. I'm a little old-fashioned about some things, and I made a few vows when I got married and thought I had to keep them until I was legally released from them. Oh God, Henry, I'm so sorry I didn't know." "It's okay, honey. You said we'd get to this point eventually, and although I wasn't entirely sure it would happen, I definitely wanted it. While she was showering, I made us something to eat. She told me that she needed to call her lawyer and inform him of her new circumstances. She called him, and he asked her to come to his office and sign some papers. I took her to her house, took her to get the car, and told her that dinner would be ready by 7. She kissed me and said, "I want to ask you for a favor." "Ask, I don't want to go into the house, but I need a change of clothes and some other things. Could you please go there and get them for me?" I told her I would, and she gave me the list, told me where to find them, kissed me again, and left for her appointment. I found the suitcases where Tammy said they should be. I found the things she wanted and went out. After dinner, we sat in front of the fireplace, sipped wine, and talked until we went to bed. I suggested she take the spare bedroom, but she said she would prefer to have a warm body nearby. In the morning, I told her to get some sleep, and I went to her house and sent in a team of cleaners. I gave him my cell number and asked him to call me when they were done, and he told me they would be out of there by 6 p.m. The next day, Tammy's house was ready for her return, but despite this, she spent 2 out of every 3 nights with me until I told her that I was moving out, and that I would have to start looking for an apartment. Nonsense, I have plenty of space, and we spend most of our time together anyway, so it just makes sense for you to move in with me. Her words made sense, and I moved in with her. I was afraid to go to closing on the sale of my house. Claudine had to be there, since the house was registered in both of our names, and her signature was required on the papers. Since she moved, she has called me at least once a week, asking me to reconsider my decision and call off the divorce. I kept saying no, and she kept telling me that she loved me, and that we could make it work if I just gave her a chance. It was hard for me because I know she really loved me, and I missed her at times, but there was just no way for us to be together and work things out. We could probably survive the night at the Christmas party, but not the rest. I love her, I miss her, but I could never forgive or forget what she did. She was there, and I saw that she took the time to look stunningly beautiful at the meeting. She was waiting for me at the entrance to the hall where the closing was to take place. She smiled at me and said, "We could have left and not attended the closing, Henry. I could go back tomorrow." I could have smiled, shrugged, and walked past her into the room without saying a word, but I felt the need to hurt the woman who had torn my heart out, and so I said, "Of course, Claudine, and then I could spend all my time trying to catch you with whoever you found to take Mike's place. This doesn't really sound like the life I'd like to lead, so thanks, but no thanks. I think I'm rejecting your idea," and I walked past her into the room. The signing went smoothly, and we each received a check for $43,000. She was fired along with Mike, and she sued the company, accusing her of harassment. She claimed Mike blackmailed her, saying that if she didn't give in to him, he would fire her, and that the company knew what Mike was doing to her, but did nothing to stop it. The company settled with her for an undisclosed amount. She left town the day after closing and hasn't been heard from since. The day my divorce was finalized, Tammy and I went somewhere to celebrate. We had dinner and then went to the cave for drinks and dancing. This morning, Tammy asked me what I planned to do now that I was free again. I will enjoy the few days of freedom I have until I can change my status to married. A few days of freedom, well, let's see. We have to apply before we can get the certificate, and there's a 3-day waiting period to get the certificate, so I think I'll be free for about 8 to 10 days. Oh wait, I forgot something. Will you marry me? I will of course sign the marriage contract. The smile disappeared from her face and she said, we have a great relationship and I'm really very happy with the way things are going. I take it this is a no to marriage, Henry, but not to what awaits us now. I don't understand, Tammy. If what we have is great, what's wrong with legitimizing it? Marriage changes a lot of things, Henry, and not always for the better. Is it because of Jules? He was everything a girl could dream of, Henry. The 9 months we spent together before we got married were perfect. The first 2 years after our wedding were wonderful, then Jules changed, and the last 3 were pure hell. We're fine, Henry, so let's leave it at that. She said no, and I gave it up, but just when she got scared that marriage would change things, she did not change everything too. I like to think that I was a pretty level-headed guy, and although some part of my mind understood what Tammy was saying, I was still a human being with all the inherent flaws of humans. The part of my mind that understood what Tammy was getting at was a very small part of my mind. A much larger part saw everything differently. One part took her refusal as a rejection of me personally. Another part thought that I was like Jules, and Jules became an asshole after he got married, so I would become an asshole too. Another article said that she rejected me because she wouldn't let me dig into her trust fund money, and a third said that Tammy saw flaws in me that she didn't like. Slowly, our relationship began to change, and from where I stood, I could see that it was only getting worse. I decided that before it got to the point where we weren't friends anymore, I had to change something. At dinner on Friday, I told Tammy that I was going to start looking for an apartment the next day. There's no need for that, Henry. Everything is fine. No, it's not like that, Tammy. Maybe you haven't seen it yet, but I saw it. I told her exactly what I was thinking, and that it was time for me to leave while we were still friends. I don't want you to leave, Henry. I know you'll never be like Jules, and I know you're not after me for my money. I just don't want to get married. We can live happily together for the rest of our lives. Henry and marriage won't make our lives any better than they already are. Maybe Tammy, but deep down I think you're not marrying me because there's something wrong with me. Something you don't like and can't or won't bring yourself to mention. I will lie and fester and not myself from the inside and cause only God knows what. As I just said, I'd rather end things while we can still be friends. She looked at me for almost a minute and then said, you're forcing me to do something I hoped I would never have to do. I'll tell you the reason why I can't marry you. Go to the living room and sit on the sofa and I'll be there in a minute. What? Why? I mean, why do you need to show me anything? Just go and sit down. In a minute, everything will become clear. I went out and sat on the couch, and a couple of minutes later Tammy came into the room with a travel suitcase. I never told you what turned Jules into a violent drunk. When I said I know you would never be like Jules, I meant it in terms of believing that you would never be a violent person. But I truly believe that you would feel the same way about me, disgusted, just like Jules. She took half a dozen video cassettes from her travel bag, turned on the TV, and inserted one of them into the player. Before I show you this, I have to tell you a little story. One day, a poor little rich girl rebelled against her overly controlling and restrictive parents. She was tired of being sent to the right schools and only being allowed to associate with the right people. Correctness, of course, was determined by her parents. She was only allowed to wear appropriate clothing again. Appropriate clothing was determined by her parents, and whatever she thought she liked and bought for herself that her parents didn't like was confiscated and disposed of. This went on for years, and could have gone on for several more, if her parents had not introduced her to her future husband. They decided he was right for her and naturally assumed she would accept it since she had everything else. Her mother actually started planning the wedding the night. The poor little rich girl was introduced to her betrothed, a man she had never seen in her life. It was too much for her. The next day she cleaned out her mother's jewelry box, loaded the car with a few items that could be pawned, drove into town, visited a half-dozen pawn shops, then picked up the money and headed west. She sent receipts home so the stolen items could be returned. In the end, she ended up in Los Angeles, got into the wrong company, and started using illegal substances. She did a lot of things that were in fashion at the time. A lot of it was just to spite her parents. She eventually came to her senses, returned home, and reconnected with her family. She met a wonderful man, married him, and life was perfect until one day she came home and found her husband sitting on the couch right where you are now watching this. She showed an adult video starring her. I'm not proud of what I did. Jules found this tape when he walked into an adult bookstore while in Los Angeles on business. After he found the first one, he watched all the videos. That night when I came home and found him watching the tape, I thought my marriage was over, but it wasn't, at least not at first. Jules thought it was great to have his own star, but the more he watched the video, the more it affected him. He started accusing me of cheating on him behind his back. If I was a few minutes late home, it was only because I was in a relationship with my lover. If he called me at work and they told him I was in a meeting, he just knew that they were covering for me while I was cheating somewhere. If I was at home and he called and I didn't pick up right away, it was because I needed to take my mind off my lover and go to the phone. He started drinking, and when he accused me of something, I told him he was crazy and he called me a liar and hit me. Okay, but what does all this have to do with me? Why did you show me this? It's in your past. This was before you met me, and it concerns me no more than what I did before you concerned you. I should have shown this to you. Jules found this by accident, and you might do the same. I don't want to get married again and go through what I went through with Jules. I would never do what he did to you. Maybe not about physical violence, but what about disgust? What will you start thinking about when I have to stay late at work and leave town for seminars and conferences? What about parties and social events? I am an attractive woman and attract the attention of men. How soon will you start thinking that maybe I'm sneaking off to meet one, two, or three of them? How long before you start thinking that because I always want more, I'm trying to get it? That will never happen because I know you, Tammy, and you are not that kind of woman. I know that if I trust you, it will not be in vain. You say that now, Henry, but don't forget that Jules was once the ideal person for me, and then he changed. You are perfect now, but what you know now can and probably will change you too. If you change and we don't get married, we might just break up. I just looked at her and shrugged. Thank you for being frank with me about this, but it doesn't change anything. If anything, this just adds another reason to the list of reasons why I need to find my own place. Another reason, yes, Tammy, in addition to the ones I have already mentioned, we can also add lack of trust to this list. You don't want to marry me because you don't trust me, and I can't live with someone who doesn't trust me. Damn it, Henry, I don't want you to move, maybe Tammy, but I think it's better this way. I found a 3-bedroom apartment I liked, bought it, and moved in. I turned one of the bedrooms into an office and made myself comfortable. I kept in touch with Tammy, and we met a couple times a week. The dates usually ended in her bedroom or mine. I think Tammy found another guy because she started turning me down when I called and asked her out, so after a couple of weeks I stopped calling. The condo had a pool and a gym, and I started spending time in both. There were also quite a few single women living in the complex, and I met a few of them while visiting the pool and gym. I dated a lot of people, but there was no spark between us, so for the most part we were just friendly neighbors. I met Carol at the gym one morning, asked her out, and we hooked up a couple of times. Again, there was no spark between us that would lead to a long-term relationship, but we liked each other, so we ended up meeting 2 or 3 times a week. This could have gone on for years if I hadn't come home one evening to find Tammy sitting on the steps. My porch, I invited her to come in, and sitting her down on the sofa, asked if she would like something to drink, to which she replied that white wine if I had any. I brought her a glass and asked how she was feeling. Unhappy, since you left, everything has gone wrong for me. When you left a big hole behind. It couldn't be that bad, you stopped seeing me, yes, and it was a stupid step on my part. Since you were no longer my steady partner, I decided that I needed to date others to see if I could find someone to take your place. I didn't feel like I could do this if I was even partially attached to you. Since then, Henry, I've dated a dozen or so guys, and I've come to the conclusion that you simply can't be replaced. I'm here today to beg you to take me back with a dozen or so guys. Yes, Henry, a lot of men. You know my nature, so I know what you're thinking, and you're right. She opened her purse, took out a piece of paper, and handed it to me. I did this when I finally accepted that I would have to crawl here and beg. I looked at the paper and saw that it was a certificate stating that Tammy had been tested and did not have any medical conditions. I returned the certificate to her and said it was somehow awkward. What? I guess I'll have to take it from you. Does this mean you will take me back? I don't know, Tammy. If I bring you back, you mean going back to what we had? I don't think so. Set any conditions you want, Henry, and I will accept them. I just want you to come back. Tonight, I'm picking Tammy up from one of her fundraisers, and we're going out for dinner, drinks, and dancing to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary. As I drove to pick her up, I thought about the last 5 years and some of the things Tammy had been worried about. I didn't become Jules. I don't doubt her when she says she has to stay late at work, and I know she behaves well when she's out of town. I will never say this out loud, and I will not even allow her to suspect that such a thought has even crossed my mind. but there are times when I almost wish that she would distract herself just once or twice and relieve the tension from me. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.